Hello, hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Rewilded Wellness Podcast. This is Lydia Joy, your host, and happy full moon in Virgo. This is my core sign, signature sign, y'all. Virgo, Sun, Mercury, and Mars all in the ninth house, and so it's just a fascinating time. And I'm happy to be here to share something that I have wanted to put together for so long, for many, many reasons, for my own self, for a book I'm writing, for a client course portal, just like really wanted to put it together for my own reasons. And it's just been in the backdrop, like waiting for me to get to it. And something just struck recently and it just kind of coheses together. So I want to talk about the continuation of like spring and seasonal eating. And I want to emphasize one of the fat soluble vitamins that I just don't feel like we talk about enough. We have some camps that are super into vitamin D still. We're never going to let that one go. And even like vitamin A. And now we're making awareness around vitamin K, although that one still has some work to do, by the way. But vitamin E, just, I don't know. I don't really hear a whole lot of people talking about it. And it's something that I have been trying to come up with a really thorough plan for and have been doing so over the years in my client work. So buckle up. This one's going to be, it might be kind of longish, but stay with me because if you really want to understand cohesive ways to approach your health as a lifestyle and reconnect to nature's patterns, and understand nutrition like truly holistically, I think you will enjoy this episode. And this affects us all because in today's world of, all the processed oils we've used, as well as this like year-round food availability, we've really lost touch with one of our ancestors' most crucial nutritional patterns, which would be seasonal consumption of all the foods, but particularly the complete vitamin E complex, the foods that contain that complex. And so I find that if we can return to these more ancestral eating patterns, if we can rewild our wellness, this provides powerful support for cellular repair. Because we all are at the effect of needing to recover our health, our cell health, from, the damaging fats like that we've consumed our whole lives, right? So this is just one of the many modern challenges we face, but it's going to be the one I'm highlighting today, right? Because it's going to cover a lot of bases. So again, as we transition to spring, I talked about this transition in my last episode and how I'm adjusting my own kind of like foods that I'm bringing in, as well as what like nutritional supports I'm going to be adding based on my most current HTMA results, because I do these seasonally for myself. This is what I do every season. I'm like looking at this season. I'm, layering in on the foundations that I've already built and seeing where I can shore things up even more. So, this is how I approach it, and this aligns with my whole like rewilding journey and core philosophy here. So, and it's really just about knowing that we can't fix it all in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I'm playing the long game. So it's all about just checking in, slowing down, creating the time and space to see where things are at, recalibrate, restore connection to what truly matters. And I think many of us are still recovering from the immense stressors of the past 5 years. I mentioned that in the last couple episodes. And I just want to remind us all, we have to remember this. I don't think we can hear this enough. Deep healing really can't occur when our lives are just filled with elements that drain us rather than build our vitality. So it's only when we establish some stability, where we can have steadiness and space that we can truly begin to like rebuild, right? And I've noticed that more clients are arriving already familiar with organ supplements. Like I gotta tell you, it was like pulling teeth for a really long time whenever I'd bring up organ meats in my client sessions for years. So everyone seems to be more familiar with it and open to it. So that's a big pivot in the last several years, especially liver. I mean, I guess we can thank Liver King. I don't know. Anyways, this presents just an excellent opportunity to like bring this in. I've been wanting to talk about this for a really long time. And this is another we can, seasonally rotate through organ consumption. This is something we would have done more intuitively, and now we're just kind of like refiguring this out, and everyone's kind of like confused a little, and like which way should I go with these things, right? Like how much do I need to take this for this long, and blah blah blah, right? So I find that it can take a solid, I want to say like a year and a half to 2 years at least, to deeply repair. And that's when you get the bad fats out for good and keep them out. Most people, this takes time. And I have rarely met anyone who's done this like completely. So keep going, keep iterating, keep pivoting, keep doing your best. I think the biggest challenge is when we try to eat out of our homes. That it's just almost impossible to avoid the bad fats if you're not, controlling the quality of them in your own home, right? So, um, right now, I think it's important to also remember we want this to be a lifestyle, right? I mean, I hope so. I hope that's what you want, a lifestyle of health. And that also really requires proper sun exposure and light exposure, right? Like that's like the number one piece. So a lot of people are starting to figure that out too. Um and then consuming the fat soluble vitamins becomes really crucial for cellular repair. And I think in the beginning, this takes a little time to work your way into, but over time, as you build momentum, it's really, really, really powerful. So, I want to explore how to incorporate vitamin E seasonally this spring. I don't typically like talking about things in isolation, as you know, but you'll very quickly realize the way that I'm going to approach it isn't in isolation at all. Okay, I just want to express. Uh, a lot more emphasis on this particular fat soluble because I'm not finding it something that is widely understood. And it took me a while to fully feel, you know, um, I don't know, solid with it in my understanding. Um, and I just want to say, like, again, with this, never feel pressured to feel like you have to implement everything you read about on the internet all at once. I learned about all this stuff like a really long time ago, and it's been one of those things I've been working on for a really, really long time. So just remember as we gradually introduce new foods to babies before they learn to walk, right? Like there are a couple years, it takes a couple years, right? So your healing journey, once you're like beginning it, it just requires that time to build the proper foundations, especially if you're interested in, you know, restoring cellular health, if you're interested in the whole mineral balancing world and, kind of just supporting your biochemistry to be corrected so that you optimize your health, right? So, you know, um, obviously our ancestors didn't have vitamin E supplements or fortified foods, right? They relied on whatever was in season. And so therefore it was automatically rotational, if you will. Um, right. And these foods would have provided the complete spectrum of we can call it vitamin E complex if you want. So it always included the full scope, right? Like, and it's interesting to look at it because we can see seasonally what nutrients may have been more needed, right? So like in the spring, it seems like vitamin E was like highly emphasized in the diet. And it's to me that's really cool because it's kind of like, nature's cellular renewal season, right? Like so we're getting the set free or loosened from the grip of winter, right? My heredity is somewhat northern, and I live in the northern hemisphere. So, if you don't live in this climate, it might be somewhat different for you, but here, we would have like fresh spring liver from young animals that are feeding on new growth grasses. So, for many years, I would purchase a lamb from a farmer, and we would have all the organs. Um, Another one that I haven't done great about that I've been trying to work on is fish roe. And that would be harvested like during the spring spawning runs. Um, this one's tricky for a lot of people. You don't have to eat sushi to eat fish roe. I mean, there are other ways you can do it, but not a lot of people enjoy it or know how to work with it or even recognize that it's an incredibly nutrient dense food source to consider. And then we have the other organs, like, I don't know if you guys have heard of sweetbreads. I used to work in a restaurant that we would have these gourmet brewed dinners, and I always was um, in charge of them. And the chef would get all fancy and always be trying something like, on off the normal American standard fare. And I remember trying sweetbreads a bunch of times. But sweetbreads, so that's the lamb brain and thymus from the young animal in the spring. Of course, there would be tons and tons of spring greens, um, such as the nettles and the dandelion. I'm going to say the wild ones because I want you guys to be thinking this way. I mean, there's also the cultivated ones that you're going to start seeing more as well. And then, of course, because the daylight has returned, we have longer daylight. Um, there's going to be more fresh eggs available because, the chickens are going to resume laying more because they have more daylight to do so. That's so long as they're, outdoors. I mean, obviously you guys want pastured, right? So like, the conventional ones are forced with, lighting and such. But anywho, so this is like a little surge of foods that we would have consumed. And it's not accidental, right? It really aligns perfectly with our body's kind of natural cellular repair cycle after the winter metabolic slowdown, if you will. So I feel like these are some of our superstars, and they've been kind of forgotten. Fish roe and organ meats. I think that these are two exceptional vitamin E based foods. And this is the time of year we would have had the fish roe. Will also fall because there are spawning runs in the fall. But fish roe contains all 8 of the vitamin E compounds, the tocopherols and the tocotrienols. And the vitamin E in the roe comes bound to phospholipids, which makes it super, super bioavailable for us. And then it also has like the exact fatty acids and minerals needed for cellular repair within it. And there's a good selenium vitamin E synergy. So we want that because that provides like really good protection against environmental toxins. And the other thing that we know about, so if you guys are familiar with Weston Price, or anybody who studied ancestral cultures and their traditional cultures and how they ate, they would have prioritized eating the roe for the women of reproductive age and as well as the growing children. And so we have a lot of information about different cultures, if you will. So if they were like more coastal and river dwelling, they would have timed their gatherings. They would have these like significant gatherings around the spawning runs, because they knew that incredible value of the roe. And, they would have consumed it fresh, right? Particularly in the spring and fall, and then had ways of preserving it through like drying and smoking, for the seasons that you just can't really get it. Um, and so then we have the organ meats, right? So this is like a really good like vitamin E matrix, if you will. And it is making a comeback. Because, our ancestors would have consumed the entire animal, the whole nose to tail. Um, and they wouldn't have wasted any part, which is a beautiful thing, really. And they would have emphasized the organs that we now have discarded for a really long time. By the way, I grew up eating liver once a week. I did not like it, but my mom did make liver. I don't know how many people have had that experience in their childhood. It's very, very rare. But thankfully I at least had some exposure, even though I didn't like it. But it helped me be a little more open to revisiting it. And so liver contains a really beautiful balanced vitamin E profile, more so than any other organs. And so it's got like higher gamma tocopherol than, most of the plant sources that we would have. And then another gland would be the brain. I don't think many people are thinking about eating brains. I remember the first time they made brains at these dinners, and I was like, yeah, I'm not, I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to go for that. But some people really loved it. And it's interesting. I think it's a big part of what they loved about it was how good it made them feel. But brain provides vitamin E in a unique phospholipid matrix that directly supports our cellular membrane structure. So most of us are not going to eat this. This is where you can get like a really high quality supplement. Incorporate that if you'd like to in the spring. And then heart. I like heart actually. I kind of call it the gateway offal because it's more muscle meat. Like it's more like a muscle meat, but it contains, tissue specific vitamin E compounds that protects against oxidative stress. So, and nobody wants the heart usually. So, I think if you can get it ground up and mix it into chili, that's my favorite way. The poultry hearts are a little bit easier to work with and grind up and mix into like some ground meat and make some like burgers or something. Um, I had someone offer me the goat heart from a goat that they slaughtered, and it was quite delicious, actually. It was so good. It was surprisingly tender. I actually wasn't sure how it was going to be, but I really enjoyed it. And then kidney, not many people want to eat the kidneys. So again, like this is where a supplement could come in, but it really offers a beautiful benefit of vitamin E. And, it has some like really good detox cofactors to go along with the kidney. That's a whole conversation. I love the kidney glandular for certain people. And then thymus and thyroid as well provide the vitamin E in the forms that are going to support our immune and metabolic functions. So, if you've been cycling through organs and you want to give some a try, I hope that this inspires you to try something different, especially if you've done liver for a while. Maybe you've incorporated it for a year or two. It's a good time to layer in some other stuff. And, these organs were consumed according to seasonal availability, and there's always a reason for it. So it's good to work within the season that you're in. And these organs in particular would have been valued for their renewal properties. So my perspective using vitamin E and mineral balancing or HTMA, the work I do with HTMA, HTMA really reveals patterns that our ancestors would have intuitively addressed through seasonal eating. So the modern human with mineral imbalances there's a big piece that we are struggling with, and it's the cellular consequences of our world, right? One of the biggies is the poor quality fats. And not to mention, like, just the year-round consumption of, like, the same limited foods, right? And so when I look at a HTMA, there are certain patterns that, to me, signal a vitamin E need, or we could call it a deficiency, but also, like, kinda show the cellular membrane damage. So, whether or not you're familiar with HTMA or not, this is still helpful to hear so you can start to realize how valuable this test is as a tool to support you on your health journey. So a lot of times I see low tissue sodium and potassium. So when the HTMA reveals that, as well as potentially a low sodium to potassium ratio, those are key that, there is cellular energy failure. Because the sodium potassium pump requires like a lot of energy to function, and it can't maintain like the proper mineral gradients across the cell membranes when those membranes have been compromised by all the bad fats, as well as fat soluble vitamin deficiency with vitamin E in particular. And so this creates like a downward spiral because damaged membranes can't support proper energy production. And this leads to further mineral transport failure. So the cell kind of like essentially like leaks these critical electrolytes, and it's unable to maintain the electrical potential necessary for the proper function. So this is like one of the most reliable indicators of cellular membrane damage that I've noticed, that specifically needs vitamin E complex restoration. And, you know, in the early years, I noticed that when I was getting the lab generated protocols with the recommendations, TEI always gave vitamin E. Always. And it seemed like every retest, like vitamin E, vitamin E, vitamin E. And I'm like, man, why do we need vitamin E for so long? And I finally just started digging into it. Because, people question this stuff. They're like, why do I have to keep taking this forever? Right. And I wanted to be confident in my recommendations and understand why it makes sense to do so. Right. Because we never want to have to do something we don't have to do these days. And a lot of times people don't understand the long approach. Another reading would be elevated calcium relative to magnesium. So this is the calcium to magnesium ratio on HTMA, and it really also provides this profound insight into our cell membrane flexibility. So when calcium becomes disproportionately elevated compared to magnesium, our cell membranes lose their fluidity and they become rigid. So it's kind of like, you probably have heard of calcium hardens arteries over time. Maybe you haven't, but if you think about calcium in like without its cofactors and things like that, out of balance, think about chalk, maybe calcium carbonate. It's only calcium, and when you drop it, it breaks. Why? Because it's hard. Right? So if calcium isn't in appropriate balance to other things, it has this hardening effect on the body. And so this rigidity really can be a downstream effect of the long-term use of the bad fats. And they've just been incorporated into the membrane structure. Right? Like, so the trans fats, the oxidized vegetable oils, all those damaged fats, what they do is they create stiff, inflexible membranes, and that's what resists proper signaling and transport. And when we get out the bad and bring in the good, and then bring in the complete vitamin E complex, this can serve as protection against this damage, as well as a restorative element that helps normalize this particular ratio, because it supports that proper membrane function again, so that then the magnesium can get in the cells better and other things can get better in the cells better and stuff like that. So, And you have to think about this, like, if you ate these bad fats the majority of your life, it is gonna take a little time to do the repair and the cleanup. Um, a lot of times people are like, not so much anymore, but there was a period where people were taking a lot of zinc. And they would come in and they would have taken all this zinc, and then it wasn't showing the way they wanted to on their HTMA, right? Like, they were very confused, and I was like, "Well, there's a lot to this," but one of the things about it is, when you see a hair test, you can see the impaired transport, these mechanisms. They just really depend on healthy cell membrane function. So anytime you think taking one thing is going to do a thing, you got to remember there's a lot going on, right? We have specific transporters that zinc requires, and they're embedded in the cell membranes. And when these membranes have been damaged from those fats, with a lack of vitamin E protection for one thing, you know, the zinc isn't just going to be able to get inside the cells efficiently, regardless of how much you supplement. So, this is something to remember. Um, so we have to get the right things in, not just any one thing. And so that vitamin E really protects the transport proteins from the oxidative damage, and it will allow your minerals to get in there. The zinc will finally reach its intracellular destinations. Woohoo! But you got to have that membrane integrity restored, and the proper vitamin E approach needs to be put in place for a while. Okay. And then you don't have to, like, worry so much about high dosing everything. It's kind of crazy how we think we have to do that. Um, and then there's things like mercury or aluminum, for example. You may have exposures to them. It may be showing or it may not be. It might be you are retaining it. So what happens is they both create this, like, widespread oxidative damage. This overwhelms our body's detoxification systems. Selenium is one of our primary defenders against these metals, but it can't function properly without adequate vitamin E. So when I'm looking at this on an HTMA, I'm looking at, like, a pattern that shows me they may have, the metals aren't coming out yet. We can kind of see that they don't have the ability to release metals, right? We have to kind of think about the cell membrane, right? We have to think about repairing the oxidative damage. So this selenium vitamin E partnership likely has not been adequately in play or been broken down or just left the cells vulnerable to the metal-induced damage. So that's another reason we need it to protect us, to protect our cellular transport system so that we can also, too, safely escort the metals out of the body. Copper dysregulation, a whole nother one, which is pretty common. And again, another indicator of underlying oxidative stress and compromised antioxidant systems. So, copper can be highly reactive when it's not properly bound to its transport proteins. So this creates those cascades of damage throughout our body, right? So again, vitamin E comes in and it serves as this, like, primary protective barrier, particularly in our cell membranes where, copper-induced lipid peroxidation can be very, very destructive. So, without the adequate vitamin E, copper can lose its controlled beneficial functions and become a contributor to cellular damage. So again, yet another reason to restore the complete vitamin E complex, right? It really helps us reestablish healthy copper metabolism and utilization. So that's just a tiny sneak peek into some of the pieces of the HTMA and the patterns and how they can tell a story of cells whose protective membranes have been compromised by years of consuming damaged fats for one thing. Like, there's other things too, but that's a biggie, you guys. And it just shows that, like, damage from the bad and the lacking of the good, right? The gains and the drains all over again. You've heard me Right? So we just got to fix that, right? We just got to take the time to do that repair. And our ancestors wouldn't have dealt with this like we do now because they were getting it seasonally and, obviously not exposed to the industrial pollution, toxins, yada yada. So the bad fat connection. I want to bring this up because like people are doing better with this these days, but we're not there yet, and it's still something that I think people need to be educated on. So maybe you have a family member who isn't on board yet. Um, share it with them, right? Like education is wonderful until it finally sinks in. So the majority of us have spent a large portion of our lives consuming all these processed vegetable oils, soybean, canola, corn, trans fats from packaged foods. Packaged foods are the worst. So hard to find anything decent, right? And then also like the rancid nuts and seeds stored improperly. How many of us ate not only like peanut butter, but like peanut butter with hydrogenated oil and sugar in it growing up, right? And then we also tend to not know how to use cooking oils properly. Nobody I talk to seems to have this figured out. And a lot of times people might burn, right? Like overheat cooking oils, and that's not good either. So you got to learn about that. Right. And then there's also all the factory farmed animal products with distorted fat profiles. So listen, I personally grew up with all this stuff, guys. We had the plastic vegetable oil container. We use it for everything. And it was in the cupboard right next to the Crisco. And we did use some real butter, but like if there was a sale, my mom wasn't going to buy the butter. She's going to buy the sale thing. So we had like the Country Crock tubs, the I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. I don't know. There's probably other ones, but those are the two I remember. And then, like I said, that hydrogenated fat peanut butter. Right. And we didn't eat real nuts. Like if we did, it was at Christmas. We would definitely get the ones locally and crack the shells and stuff like that. So I had like a tiny taste of real food in my upbringing, and none of our meat was pasture raised or grass fed. So, it's all of us. Okay. We're all in this together. So like really quick, I want to help us understand like what these damaged fats do is they become incorporated into our cell membranes, and then they create rigid dysfunctional cell surfaces. They compromise our receptor sites for our hormones. They damage the transport channels for the minerals. They impair the cellular communication, and they reduce energy production. So really what we're doing in this work is at the cell level, right? So the cell membrane just like almost becomes like this like battleground we have to like look at, right? It's where mineral balance is either won or lost, right? So if you want to win, this is what you got to do. And that's why I talk about the rewilding ancestral solution, right? Like, but with the modern times, so we can, put it into practice realistically. So when I see the patterns I just mentioned, I'm going to want to implement recommendations inspired by the ancestral wisdom, but adapted to where we're at, right? So number one thing we have to do, and I've said this before, and I recently brought it back up on Instagram, is like, get the bad fats out for good. Like, don't do anything else until you get the bad fats out. If you can do that, that's a big, big, big win for your health, your family's health. So get rid of them all. Don't just get rid of them all and don't look back. Remove all the bad fats, all the processed vegetable oils, the trans fats. Get a list of the good stuff. Get the good stuff. Only use the good stuff. Learn the cooking method so you're avoiding fat oxidation, right? So what are your higher heat point fats? What are your moderate heat point fats? Which fats should you not cook, right? Once you learn this stuff, you will know it and it will become part of your routine. It is a learning curve, yes, but it's worth learning. Make sure you're learning how to properly store these things, and then just, create a clean fat kitchen environment and never look back. I talked about this more in my episode 131 from June of 2022, and the title was, Are Your Cells Made of Plastic? I just wanted to be a little stark there. And I did drop some F-bombs in this episode when I was talking about these toxic fats. I mean, can you blame me? But I just wanted to give you that fair warning. And so I have the link in the show notes for you because I did go into that more in that episode as well. So if you're not yet familiar, you can check that episode out. You can also go to places like the Weston Price Foundation and get their shopping guide, which will teach you how to purchase the best fats and where you can get them all over the United States. So I promise you this is possible and doable. The next thing you want to do is figure out how to, once you get the bad fats out and the good fats in, you're going to want to figure out how you're going to consume the complete vitamin E complex, the whole spectrum, right? Now, I mentioned the lab earlier that they always wanted us giving like the vitamin E supplement. But, I prefer to use food with all the fat soluble vitamins or a food based supplement for any of the fat solubles. I just haven't found a supplement that I feel good about. So this is where the ancestral foods become super critical. So this is where you can start to cycle. Most people start with pastured egg yolks, right? Like that's a great one. And honestly, I don't think you should eat eggs every single day ad nauseum, but maybe in the beginning, like especially in the spring, pastured egg yolks every day would be amazing to help start this process. Make sure any of the oils you're getting are unrefined. And like oils would be used in small amounts with meals. I tend to cook with animal fats primarily. I don't really cook with plant oils or nut and seed oils. I'd rather eat the fresh nuts and seeds personally. If you can soak them or freshly grind them, that's optimal. This one's a little more tough. I'm still working on my, optimization of nuts and seeds. My goal is to eat nuts and seeds seasonally and make my own nut and seed butters. There's really a lot of great nuts that we can forage for. And then seeds, like even we could harvest from, say, for example, pumpkin and winter squash, right? Like up here where I live. So you could save all your pumpkin and your squash seeds in the fall, eat some then, like brine them up and dehydrate them and then store some for later as well. And then, grass-fed liver. So a lot of people don't want to eat it. I would encourage you to at least give it a try. You should be able to find it in ground meats with organ blends. So it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like 25% organ and a pound of ground beef or something. A lot more people are doing this. It's easier to find. That's the easiest way to start with liver. And then obviously there's liver supplements as well. So that would be the next thing to work with. And then if you're a little more adventurous and you have done those things for a while and you haven't yet worked with fish roe, and maybe you're not thinking you want to eat the roe, they actually have capsules now. So you could try like the freeze dried whole roe. Or you could be adventurous and just get it in the spring and fall and give it a try and see how it makes you feel. Experiment, be creative, have some fun. So these are a good core base way to get the complete vitamin E complex that we need for cellular repair. Two more things that I would say would be ghee. I like to cook with ghee in the spring. And then the fresh cream in the spring as well, like fresh heavy cream, if you can do dairy, is going to have all your fat-soluble vitamins. So those two will have all of the fat solubles, and those are a nice backdrop in my repertoire as well. But the beautiful thing about the ones I just mentioned is you're gonna get the whole complex, not just like alpha tocopherol, right? You're gonna get all 8 compounds in more natural ratios, which is something that I haven't really seen anyone replicate in a supplement. And I talked more about that in episode 130 from June of 2022. And I talked about regenerative farming because I went on a tour of a farm and I talked all about the fat soluble vitamins in there if you want more on that. And then the last piece of this would be like once you get those two phases handled and like worked on, then you can more deeply support this whole cycle and renewing your cells by getting, your mineral supplementation targeted based on your HTMA. If you need more phospholipid support, you can do so. You want to make sure you're getting in the selenium as well, like just kind of cross-reference and see where you're at with that piece. Definitely want to be supporting bile production for proper fat absorption. In the spring, the way we do this would be through the bitters that are coming up, the bitter plants, the bitter seasonal greens and things like that. You could always do a bitter tincture to start if you're not eating a lot of bitter foods yet. And then definitely going to want to address gut health to maximize your nutrient uptake. So that's, more of an in-depth phase that can take some additional information and insight to work with. So I'd like to kind of talk about like a renewal timeline. Everyone wants to know the time frames of these things, right? I just kind of want to give you an idea of what you can kind of expect, right? And I typically never recommend like any strict diet or any detox. You know this, right? But one of the best detoxes you can do is just get these fats out. Like, be vigilant about it. That's like the best cleanse, in my opinion, that most of us can do, right? It's like getting the quality right. You get the bad stuff out, you are doing a major detox for your body. And then just let it become a lifelong habit. Don't make it like some quick fix detox that people do, right? And give it a full year commitment, right? Once you give it a full year, you should notice a lot of change, right? And then by year 2, it's just like, okay, I can build on this, right? You're going to have a lot more stability in your body. You're going to be way less sensitive to if you veer off. Well, not if, when you veer off, because it's just, we will, right? Here and there. So, it's going to give you that stability. You'll see it in a myriad of ways related to the cellular repair that's going on. And so to me, this is like a beautiful pillar you can establish for yourself. So here's a little cellular renewal journey. Let's go on this together. So when you get out of the bad and bring in the good and begin to get the vitamin E sources in there, the first 30 days, you should have some initial stabilization as the vitamin E starts to get in there and circulate and rise and do some of the repair. So the damaged fat consumption stops and some of the repair begins. So you'll feel some minor stabilization. It just really does depend on all the things you got going on in your life. Then between like 30 to 90 days, you should definitely, so there's a month to 3 months, right? You should see some improvements in your energy and digestive function. Most people tell me they feel something from organs, so I haven't heard anyone say that they haven't. And then like 3 months to another month, like 4 months, you should start to really have that cellular renewal going, right? Like, and the red blood cells and tissues are going to like be able to complete their turnover cycle in that time frame, right? And then in 4 to 6 months, you should start to be able to have more shifts in your mineral patterns because the transport systems are going to be regenerating. And then in 6 to 12 months, you should have much more deep tissue renewal, restored metabolic function. So that's just a potential of what you could experience. And this is cool because it kind of mimics the seasonal renewal cycle that our ancestors experienced naturally, right? So if you start, it's the spring now. Like, what a great time to start this. And then in a year from now, you can reflect back and see all the change you've sustained. Now, I do think, unfortunately, that modern challenges require a little extra support. So unlike our ancestors who moved through all this stuff more naturally, modern humans, we need a little more support, unfortunately. So sometimes we need a little bit more, like a higher dose, of these vitamin E requirements in the beginning because of the greater environmental toxin exposure we have. Um, and sometimes we need additional digestive support to compensate for the compromised digestive function that's also there, right? And then we're going to always need more strategic supplementation to address any more severe imbalances, deficiencies, etc. Um, Detoxification support is going to be more needed as you go along, because then your body will start to have stored toxins release as you have this cellular renovation going on. And I also find that emotional support can be very helpful, because this renewal process isn't just always easy. It's not always like smooth and peachy keen. So just keep that in mind. This is why I'm mentioning what I mentioned, but then like the additional layer of going further, getting that extra support that's really targeted to you, is so helpful. And, I just want to take a stand for, this return to ancestral wisdom that we once would have had as we rewild our wellness. The most profound lesson that I've learned through my years of working with HTMA is that our bodies, they still can operate on ancestral timelines and expectations, but we do have to align our nutrition with these innate patterns, with the seasons, right? Like we have to, get the sun exposure. We have to get the nature piece in there, right? But remarkable healing really becomes possible as we shift towards this. So I know that we can't perfectly recreate any of this, right? I'm not saying that we can or should, but with an understanding of it, we can be more strategic in how we rotate our vitamin E food sources to kind of mimic those natural cycles. So, it'll be different each season. So right now, I guess like late February to May, what I mentioned would be those fresh organ meats, fish roe, and all the early spring greens, including the bitters. And then the summer would be a little different. We still have the pastured eggs. They would be a little more abundant because of all that sun exposure that chickens are getting. Maybe some summer fish. Some of the seasonal nuts and seeds each season are going to be different. Fall is going to be different, right? We're going to definitely be able to have more mineral-rich organ meats from other types of animals, different quality fats, right? Same thing with the winter. In the winter, it's going to be more of like the preserved options, right? With a focus on nutrient density, where we're like conserving through the winter. And then the cycle repeats itself, right? So if you haven't done any of this cyclical work with your diet, I highly recommend, choosing something out of this episode to work with this spring. So I want to share a couple like super quick case studies. I was like trying to remember some people in the past that I had stories from, and I went back looking for them. So a client, we'll call her Maria. She came to me with chronic fatigue, hormone imbalances, some pretty persistent brain fog. And when we looked at her HTMA, she had the signs of cellular membrane damage that I mentioned, but like her sodium and potassium were really, really low. And then she had elevated calcium. And then the poor zinc, like her zinc wasn't looking good, even though she took a lot for a while. So when we talked about her history, one of the big things that we talked about was like she really thought certain fats were healthy. And she kind of like really, used them quite a lot. But then also too was doing the whole kind of like low fat version, right? Like, and then the low calorie dieting. So it was just kind of a setup, right? Like for her cells. So there was no structural integrity within her cells, and just kind of this lack of deep nutrition in her history, for one thing. So, with that in mind, she was willing to do some of the things that I just shared with you guys. So she switched her fats. I mean, obviously, that's going to yield results because that's such a big shift, right? But she made the complete switch. We talked about like how to do nuts and seeds, and she started doing a little bit of that. pastured egg yolks, and then she did the grass-fed liver, and then at one point we brought in some, fish roe, which actually was her idea at the time. Um, I think it was like 3 months in, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like a new person." Um, she's like, "My energy has, like, doubled." And then by the time we did a hair test, which was around 6 months in, um, her pattern looked really good, like, her mineral retention and transport was looking a lot better, her sodium potassium levels had improved, but the biggest thing was her symptoms, right? Like, she wasn't complaining about any of those things anymore, because her cells were regaining their functional integrity. So that was, like, um a really cool thing for her to experience, and for me to witness. So, obviously this is a jump start, right? Like, what I'm suggesting, because we wanna go beyond supplementation and create that, like, vitamin E, lifestyle, if you will, right? Um, yeah, so I just kinda wanna say that, like, when you're doing this, just start with what's familiar to you, right? Like, so some people don't wanna go into some of these things, so just start where you're at, right? Start with the egg yolks, start with the getting some acceptance around organ meats, like wherever you feel comfortable. I really think that gentle cooking of organs is the best. So low temperature techniques, they're going to preserve the vitamin E. So you don't want to heavily cook them. Even though I just mentioned, like, putting it in your chili, just like a quick pan sear of some chicken liver or chicken hearts or something. But, like, again, not everyone loves that. My chicken liver pate is one of the recipes that I've been able to win people over with. It's also gonna utilize ghee, so it's a really beautiful way to get all your fat solubles. I'll have a link for that in the show notes for you as well. That is definitely a preservation skill that you can learn, making a really good pate. Learn to properly store nuts. Don't rely on all the packaged ones. Like, this one's a hard one to learn. But the Weston Price shopping guide will help you. And then learn what nuts and seeds are local and in season to you, and, like, just find ways to start getting. Like, I collected a whole bunch of shellbark hickory nuts and some other. What's the other one? Oh my goodness, I forget the name of the other one. And then we have somewhere here we can get, like, walnuts in the fall. So, you can start to collect them and store them properly and use them that way. It's also really nice to build relationships with farmers raising animals on pasture and learn some of these skills, right? And then kind of create rituals. Like, that's what I've done. And so in the spring, I make my chicken liver pate. In the summer, I get, like, turkey hearts and livers, and I weave them into some things. And in the fall, so I just kind of have some seasonal ways that I do this, and they've just become accepted, right? Like, we also do Taco Tuesday year round, and so a lot of times I'll get um the ground beef I was mentioning. And I try to gently cook my meat on a low simmer. So, it's still going to be helpful. You're still going to get some benefit from the vitamin E there. Um, but a lot of people do resist. So, it is just one of those things. They can be good, even if you don't love them at first. Like, I had to teach myself to like them. And I was willing to do it because I, like, studied and read and learned the value that they had. And, I was willing to give them a try. Um, but they're not like a weekly thing I make. So I still do rely on, some supplements, but I think it's really great to reconnect with this piece. So give it a shot and make sure, you're supporting regenerative farmers who honor the whole animal. So you can ethically, consume them. Organ meats are still more economical than muscle meats, and they have a lot more nutrient density to them. So they're a little bit more budget friendly. So that's also a benefit. And, just start with those gateway foods. Like I said, the heart, can be like a gateway hopeful. I had to sneak it into my things and then tell the kids later, and they were like, "Oh, okay." And then eventually they did accept it. At first, if I would tell them, they just were like, "No, we're not eating that." So definitely check out the chicken liver pate recipe that is in the show notes for you. And there is a really important mineral connection, as you heard me talk about that. I think that this vitamin E relationship, it kind of goes both ways. Like, as vitamin E restores the cell membrane function, the mineral transport improves. As mineral balance optimizes, we can better utilize the vitamin E. So, this is a beautiful thing, right? We have some synergy minerals and cofactors and such for vitamin E. So selenium's the biggie. It's a really important cofactor for vitamin E recycling and antioxidant function. Zinc, we need zinc for proper vitamin E utilization and transport. Magnesium, it's going to help with getting that vitamin E to properly protect our cell membranes. Potassium works with vitamin E to maintain the proper cell membrane potential. And the manganese supports the antioxidant enzymes that work alongside vitamin E. So, again, this is where those ancestral foods are going to really help you when you're getting them in alongside the minerals. And it's just a beautiful synergy. And so, the future of our cellular health really is looking at our past. As we keep facing these increasing environmental challenges and the widespread mineral depletion in the soils, which, by the way, there's people that are working on this. I think it just makes sense to return to this ancestral view. Like, it's really essential in these times. And it just protects us in ways that, like, the isolated supplements just really cannot match. Right? Like, there's just such a rise of, all this chronic inflammation, all these disrupted hormones and accumulated toxins, right? Like, we really need this cellular protection more than ever. And now people are becoming aware of it and creating a million other products out there for cellular repair when we already had the knowledge and resources right in front of us all this time. So we don't need to go out and take all these things, right? Like, we can return to nature's ways. So I don't look at it as like I don't look at utilizing vitamin E as like a nutrient that we have to take now because we want to just prevent like a deficiency, right? Like, that's how like the mainstream views nutrients, right? It's really a cornerstone of our cellular resilience. It's like a foundation. It's a foundation that mineral balance has to be built on. So what can happen is when the cellular membranes have integrity again, the minerals get where they're supposed to go. The toxins remain outside where they belong. The hormones dock with their receptors. Energy production proceeds efficiently. Cellular communication remains clear and consistent, right? Like, so this is huge. This is a really big deal. So, we've known this for a really long time. Like, there's the Inuit, right? And their fish roe practices. They revered it as a sacred food. Then there's like the traditional European organ preparation where they did the pâtés, like I mentioned. And the key to that is like they're protecting it with a top layer of fat. Like, so the top layer of your pâté is covered in a ghee, and this prevents oxidation. So when you make it properly, you can store it. And I freeze mine in little tiny jars and then pull them out when I'm ready to eat them. But even still, you want to coat them and protect them. And then so there is definitely going to be a learning curve because there are specific cooking techniques that minimize the heat damage to the vitamin E. Like the way the sweetbreads were prepared. they're prepared very gently because we want that complete nutrient profile to remain intact. I think they even knew like specific herb combos to help with the vitamin E absorption too. Um, and things like that. So then, and Asian cultures would have like their fish roe traditions, right? Like, um, they had different preservations and salting techniques. And, I think they even might have combined them with fermented foods. So if you just kind of go back and look at some of that, you'll see like, this has been with us all along. And I think there is a hidden cost uh to this whole vitamin E, missing in the mineral problems we have today, right? Like the consequences we are at the effect of abandoning these practices, right? These traditional foods. It just goes way beyond, right? How it shows up in the hair test, and then how it shows up in our symptoms, right? So some of the biggies that people are dealing with around hormones would be like your thyroid hormone, resisting, like not being able to get inside the cell. Um, and that's what a lot of people are witnessing is like like I'll have normal blood levels, but I still feel um like hypothyroid, right? And that's because at the cell level your hormones are not working properly. Same thing is true for insulin, right? Like if there's an insulin receptor dysfunction, it's going to be a player in this whole metabolic syndrome piece that we're seeing so prevalent. Same thing with our sex hormones, right? Like we are at the effect of this, and the ladies are, seemingly at their wits end with it too, right? Like and it's not necessarily that we always have low production or bad production of our hormones. Sometimes it really is just they aren't getting where they need to go, as well as like the adrenal signaling problems and how that affects the stress response, and growth factor resistance affecting our tissue repair, things like that. So the membranes really depend on the vitamin E, so that we can have adequate energy production, right? um Deal with like the damage, right? Any accumulative damage in our cells, and then help with that transport. We got to get the nutrients in, right? Because if we don't, then what what are we doing? So like this helps our cellular batteries retain the proper charge, so that we can have sustained energy rather than erratic energy. And these are some of the biggest problems we're dealing with collectively. So all right. Well, so there's a lot of more I could keep saying about this. I do want to quickly say, like, I think I gave you some strategies earlier, but like, just start looking for local farmers raising animals on pasture. I have a lot of these people in my corner. And then another one that I'm slowly delving because my son is in this community now, he likes to fish, is like anyone who's fishing with like sustainable harvesting practices, right? Like that's a little harder. Depends on where you live. Um, there are companies that are good, like Vital Choice Seafood is a good one. So, you can likely find some companies that you can order from until you can get a more local setup. Or even like your local seafood establishment. So, for example, I live close to enough to the coast that we can get whatever is in season, like fresh. So, but it is important to like interview the owner and just ask them a lot of questions. Um, and establish a relationship so that you can kind of see how they source and just like feel comfortable with what you're purchasing. Hunters willing to share their organ, I call it the organ donation. Because a lot of hunters don't even use the organ meats, right? It's a little harder for me to come by this one, but I tell you what, if you put the word out and people know hunters and they know you and they know you're looking for this stuff, you will score some organs, I promise. And then if they're open-minded enough, they'll let you make them something and you can win some people over, right? And then, any small scale producers of any of these things, right? Like, um, it's just great to know people who are trying to do this right? I have a gold mine of people in my area that I can get all of these things high quality from. And then the last thing would be like finding some kind of a community group focusing on the traditional food preservation. So my go-to is still the Weston Price Foundation, but there are more and more coming together. I used to facilitate this group in my area years ago, and it was great. It was great because we all came together and shared food together and resources and whatnot. So you can find a chapter group near you on their website as well. Alrighty. So, and then there's just so much we could talk about, just like even building family traditions around ancestral foods, the environmental case for all of this, right? Like working with the whole animal, the whole nutrient density piece, the regenerative connection. But I did have a couple more case studies I wanted to share because I forgot about them. But here's another client. Let's call her Sarah. This one's a thyroid example. I really wanted to include one of these. She had struggled with persistent hypothyroid symptoms, right? Like despite the normal lab values and years of medication adjustments. And so her hair test revealed some seriously depressed, like tissue potassium, um, like not even registering. And she had some elevated mercury, poor selenium utilization. I'm kind of highlighting those things because they're very correlated to the thyroid in the way that we look at this test. So anyways, we implemented some of these things like the ancestral vitamin E stuff that I talked about, right? She actually was willing to do fresh liver twice weekly. And then eventually she did some fish roe supplements. And then she did start to have some recovery. And within 3 months, um, she finally like felt like her thyroid medication was working. And that's always a caveat we have to mention is like it could actually work too good and then you might not need as much. And then when we finally retested, we could see some shifts, like her mercury was coming down, her selenium retention was improving, her energy was stabilizing and getting better. So what was happening was the thyroid hormone that she was taking, it couldn't even get in her cells because that membrane integrity was not good, right? And so we brought in the right pieces and that put it back together for her. So that was pretty cool. She was very happy. And then I have a fertility story because obviously this is a big piece in that. Let's call her Emma. She had some miscarriages, early miscarriages, and then was told she had like unexplained infertility. And her HTMA revealed some also, severe mineral transport issues, um, namely like those low tissue sodium and potassium, right? And so, and I think her gosh, I didn't write this down, but I'm pretty sure her sodium potassium ratio was also low. Again, we brought in really mostly nutritive support and some minerals. And she hadn't done any of this yet. So it really made a profound difference for her. She got into egg yolks, the liver, the specific minerals, was vigilant with the fats. And she was able to conceive, later that year. So, then we eventually did a retest. And we saw a lot of improvements on her hair test and in her cellular function. So, that was another piece like our ancestors would have known was like the whole reproductive success, depending on these things, right? So like our cellular communication needs the membranes working right. So these foods are really, really going to help with that. Right. And I think this is like a cultural reclamation we need to make and take, right? Like it's really one of the beautiful ways we can return to nature's ways, right? And I'm so glad to have watched this over the time that I've been in this work, but we have lost it over the generations. And so We do need to bring it back so we can teach our kids so they can take it on. It's just important. And also so we can have more people raising animals in the right way, and being able to provide more for more people. So it's a big piece, guys. It's a thread that I wanted to go into, and I could have gone on and on about this. Um, talking about teaching the next generation is near and dear to my heart as well. But I do think it's important to merge this information, this wisdom, this reclamation, this rewilding, right? You know, to just to honor that, but to also support our future health and our current health. But our future health, I'm quite concerned about, quite frankly. So, using the HTMA can really help us deepen this piece once we've laid some foundations and we need a little more targeting. So keep that in the back of your mind. This is one more way I look at this and use this in my work. So, I hope you found like something really valuable today in what I shared and can kind of walk away understanding the relationship between vitamin E and mineral balance better. It's not just like some, nutritional factoid. Oh, you have to take vitamin E. Rah. It's really fundamental and it's a key principle and it's huge for our cellular biology. So, and it's beautiful to weave it in layers, so you feel a little bit more, I don't know, to me, it feels more intuitive and exciting to approach it in this way than just like taking some pill for 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't want to do that. It's not the optimal approach. You miss out on so much nuance and so much depth to restoration of your body that way. Alrighty. Well, I like realigning my body with natural patterns that supported human health for millennia. I hope you do too. We have to get away from this modern nutrition world of quick fix, and it's just really not helping us. So this is just like a beautiful way to look at it as a core foundation, right? And guys, look, without cellular membrane integrity, and you're going to be hearing this, and a lot of health circles are catching on to this and like really talking about it more, thankfully. Um, like the whole mineral foundation depends on this. We have got to fix ourselves. And so, yeah, I don't think that the way we fix it is in bottles of isolated alpha tocopherol and such, or expensive, super expensive vitamin E supplements. I mean, some of them are good. Some of them are good. But we're missing out on the beauty of eating in this way. So, all right, guys. Well, your cells carry the ancestral memory of these foods. They recognize and respond to the complete nutritional matrices found in them. So, I think that that's a beautiful way to rewild our nutrition and return to those foods that have like sustained us for a really long time. That said, I could go on and on and on. I hope you found this helpful and maybe understand a little bit more why I'm so passionate about rewilding our nutrition. We're just really in this optimal time where we can restore everything that was lost. And it's really cool. It's really beautiful. So, all right. Well, if you need any additional support, that I work with people in a deeper way, and you can learn more about that on my website, particularly with the HTMA work, but other packages as well. So you can check those out on my website through the show notes below. And, my rewilded wellness approach combines this traditional wisdom with our modern testing and our modern world in mind to just like really address this backdrop of what's going on in our bodies so we can address the deeper roots of the mineral balances that are, holding us back. All right. So make sure you check the show notes, especially if you want that chicken liver pate recipe or anything else. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for listening.